Good morning. It is Tuesday, March the 30th, and this is The Drill. Thank you. And now the daily declaration for spiritual warfare. I will guide you continually. I will be your hiding place, and I will protect you from trouble. I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my loving eye on you. I will always guide you and provide good things to eat when you are in the desert. I will make you healthy. You will be like a garden that has plenty of water, or like a stream that never runs dry. I will clear a path in your desert and will make a straight road for you to follow. I am able to fill in every valley you face and to flatten every hill and mountain that seem to hinder your way. I will level the rough and rugged ground so that you may see that my glory surrounds your path. Prayer declaration. Father, guide me continually with your eye. Guide me by the skillfulness of your hands. Lead me in a plain path because of my enemies. Make the crooked places straight and the rough places smooth before me. Send out your light and truth, and let them lead me. Teach me to do your will, and lead me into the land of uprightness. And that was the daily declaration for spiritual warfare for Tuesday, March the 30th. When I come back, I'm going to be reading from a book on propaganda. Lots of insights for how the left is currently operating in our country, in our civilization. And then two-parter on addiction. All that when I come back. Thank you. And now I'm reading from, I've been reading this book for the past, no, that's all right there, a couple of days. Here we go. It's on propaganda. And because of the way Kindle works, it's very difficult to see who the author is on this. But at some point, I will go ahead and make note of who the author is and give them due credit. Let's see. Let's see. And I was I was at chapter 5. I've been reading this. Here we go. And what this chapter that I'm going to be reading, parts of it, is, not the whole chapter, is the psychology of public relations. And it offers a lot of keen insights about the methods that the post-Marxists in this country are using to try to turn this country into a socialist playground. The psychology of public relations. The systemic study of mass psychology revealed to students the potentialities of invisible government of society by manipulation of the motives which actuate man in the group. The recent practice of propaganda has proved that it is possible, at least up to a certain point and within certain limits. The modern propagandist studies systematically and objectively the material with which he is working in the spirit of the laboratory. Scientific accuracy of results is not to be expected because many of the elements of the situation must always be beyond his control. If you can influence the leaders either with or without their conscious cooperation, you automatically influence the group with which they sway. But men do not need to be actually gathered together in a public meeting or in a street riot to be subject to the influences of mass psychology. Because man is by nature gregarious, he feels himself to be a member of a herd, even when he is alone in his room with the curtains drawn. His mind retains the patterns which have been stamped on it by the group influences. A man sits in his office deciding what stocks to buy. He imagines, no doubt, that he is planning his purchases according to his own judgment. In actual fact, his judgment is a melange of impressions stamped on his mind by outside influences which unconsciously control his thought. Trotter and Le Bon concluded that the group mind does not always think in the strict sense of the word. In place of thoughts, it has impulses, habits, and emotions. In making up its mind, its first impulse is usually to follow the example of a trusted leader. But when the example of the leader is not at hand and the herd must think for itself, it does so by means of cliches, pat words, or images which stand for a whole group of ideas or experiences. By playing upon an old cliche or manipulating a new one, the propagandist can sometimes swing a whole mass of group emotions. In Great Britain during the war, the evacuation hospitals came in for a considerable amount of criticism because of the summary way in which they handled their wounded. It was assumed by the public that a hospital gives prolonged and conscientious attention to its patients. When the name was changed to evacuation posts, the critical reaction vanished. No one expected more than an adequate emergency treatment from an institution so named. The cliche hospital was indelibly associated in the public mind with a certain picture. Men are rarely aware of the real reasons which motivate their actions. It is chiefly the psychologists of the school of Freud who have pointed out that many of man's thoughts and actions are contemporary substitutes for desires which has been obliged to suppress. A man has been obliged to suppress. A thing may be desired not for its intrinsic worth or usefulness, but because he has unconsciously come to see it as a symbol of something else, the desire for which he is ashamed to admit to himself. This general principle that men are very largely actuated by motives which they conceal from themselves is as true of mass as of individual psychology. It is not sufficient to understand only the mechanical structure of society, the groupings and cleavages and loyalties. The old propagandist based his work on the mechanistic reaction psychology then in vogue in our colleges. This assumed that the human mind was merely an individual machine, a system of nerves and nerve centers reacting with mechanical regularity to stimuli, like a helpless, will-less automaton. It was one of the doctrines of the reaction psychology that a certain stimulus, often repeated, would create a habit, or that the mere reiteration of an idea would create a conviction. The newer salesmanship, understanding the group structure of society and principles of mass psychology, would first ask, quote, who is it that influences the eating habits of the world, unquote. The answer obviously is, quote, the physicians, unquote. The new salesman will then suggest to physicians to say publicly that it is wholesome to eat bacon. He knows as a mathematical certainty that large numbers of persons will follow the advice of their doctors because he understands the psychological relation of dependence of men upon their physicians. The old-fashioned propagandists, using almost exclusively the appeal of the printed word, tried to persuade the individual reader to buy a definite article immediately. You, perhaps with a finger pointed at the reader, buy O'Leary's rubber heels now. The advertisers sought by means of reiteration and emphasis directed upon the individual to break down or penetrate sales resistance. Although the appeal was aimed at 50 million persons, it was aimed at each as an individual. The new salesmanship has found it possible by dealing with men in mass through their group formations to set up psychological and emotional currents which will work for him. Instead of assaulting sales resistance by direct attack, he is interested in removing sales resistance. He creates circumstances which will swing emotional currents so as to make for purchaser demand. If, for instance, I want to sell pianos, it is not sufficient to blanket the country with a direct appeal, such as, you buy a Mozart piano now. It is cheap. The best artists use it. It will last for years. The claims may all be true, but they are in direct conflict with the claims of other piano manufacturers and the indirect competition with the claims of a radio or motor cars, each competing for the consumer's dollar. What are the true reasons for the purchase? What are the true reasons for the purchaser is planning to spend his money on a new car instead of on a new piano? Because he has decided that he wants the commodity called locomotion more than he wants the commodity called music? Not altogether. He buys a car because it is at the moment the group custom to buy cars. The modern propagandist, therefore, sets to work to create circumstances which will modify that custom. He appeals perhaps to the home instinct, which is fundamental. He will endeavor to develop public acceptance of the idea of a music room in the home. This he may do, for example, by organizing an exhibition of period music rooms designed by well-known decorators who themselves exert an influence on the buying groups. He enhances the effectiveness and prestige of these rooms by putting in them rare and valuable tapestry. Then, in order to create dramatic interest in the exhibit, he stages an event or ceremony. To this ceremony, key people, persons known to influence the buying habits of the public, such as a famous violinist, a popular artist, and a society leader, are invited. These key people affect other groups, lifting the idea of the music room to a place in the public consciousness which it did not have before. The juxtaposition of these leaders and the ideas which they are dramatizing are then projected to the wider public through various publicity channels. Meanwhile, influential architects have been persuaded to make the music room an integral architectural part of their plans, with perhaps a specially charming niche in one corner for the piano. Less influential architects will, as a matter of course, imitate what is done by the men whom they consider masters of their profession. They in turn will implant the idea of music room in the mind of the general public. The music room will be accepted because it has been made the thing, and the man or woman who has a music room or has arranged a corner of the parlor as a music corner will naturally think of buying a piano. It will come to him as his own idea. Under the old salesmanship, the manufacturer said to the prospective purchaser, "Please buy a piano." The new salesmanship has reversed the process and caused the prospective purchaser to say to the manufacturer, "Please sell me a piano." So that's as far as I'm going to go with this particular chapter, because it finally makes my point, so to speak. But what it's saying, I'm reading this because this is what the left is doing. The left is working at that kind of a depth, in which they are trying to create an environment in the United States of America in which you and I will demand socialism. Okay? Instead of coming to us like Marxists used to do, coming at us directly and say, be a Marxist or else, support the revolution or else, the post-Marxists come to us and try to influence our culture so that we will naturally want, desire, and ask to be sold, if you will, socialism. Okay, it will seem like a very natural thing to do. So this is the way they they control the way that we dress, the way that we talk, and the way that we think about things. Getting everybody to look at creating all problems are we problems instead of I problems and you problems. Okay, so if all problems are we problems, right there, we're now starting to think in terms of socialism. What do we do about addiction, which is coming later? But what do we do about addiction and addicts? And then they also create certain foundations that support socialistic ideas. If we start with a premise, it's going to lead us in a particular direction. If we start with the premise of the addict as criminal, it'll lead us in one direction. If we start with the premise of addict as a hospital patient or as sick or ill, it'll lead us in a different direction. But the point is, again, that the left wants to do things that are more oblique and set up our culture and create a culture and foundations within that culture that will force us to demand socialism, to demand equity, for instance. So those are the kinds of things that you want to be on the lookout for as a true conservative, is getting used to read books and whatnot, but get used to the idea of trying to look, so to speak, behind the curtain, to use a Wizard of Oz metaphor, looking behind the curtain and try to find out what's really going on here. Particularly, a lot of things seem innocuous. Little phrases, little, hey, boss, that kind of thing may seem innocuous at first, but may be the foundation for something you're not going to be able to resist down the line. So When I come back, I'm going to have my two-part series on the addict and addiction. Foundationalism. One of the things that we have to do as true conservatives is challenge the foundations that we see around us. We are where we are in our civilization regarding gays and gay rights because of one particular study. I think it came out of Texas, ironically enough, that just boldly declared that being gay was biological, that it was something that gays could not control. That changed the whole dynamics of gay-straight relationships in this country. Another one where we're reaping the fruits, the nasty fruits is our relationship with addicts. So, and I'm not talking about the people that are what I call natural addicts, which are the insane, the psychotic. They're addicted to their drug, which is psychosis, as is the meth or whatnot addict. So here, what had happened a long time ago is a little quick brief history. Is it used to be addicts were treated appropriately as criminals. Okay, it didn't matter to anybody, and it shouldn't matter to anyone in terms of our civilization, our societies, is whether or not why the addict is an addict, how they became an addict doesn't matter. Okay, and you're criminal because addicts are going to engage in criminal behavior. That's what they do to get their money. They steal because they may go to work for a while, but their addiction is going to cost them more and more and more, and pretty soon they get to the point where they're and also they become less and less interested. Anyways, who wants to go to work? If you're high all the time, why do you want to go to work? You don't, and you don't want to pay rent, and you don't want to. So you end up on the street anyways. But you also end up being part of a criminal milieu. So you're part of the problem now, where wherever you're going to go as an addict, there's also going to be then drug pushers who are usually part of a gang or a mafia of some sort. So the point is that you were treated as a criminal. Then we got into, in the 70s, I believe, was when there was a big push to change the thinking behind the thinking in terms of how we deal with addicts, and that addicts are sick. They have a disease, because that's the way. Again, AA started that way with that it's a disease. But the fact of the matter is that, and as AA tells you, or NA, or any of these organizations say, it doesn't matter that it's a disease from the standpoint of responsibility. You're still responsible for your own behavior. You're still responsible for getting clean and sober and staying that way. It is also your responsibility to be honest and to operate within the law. Quit being a lawbreaker and start getting your act together and start being part of society. But when we start having this collective sort of thing where you can't come out and criticize addicts without having the left scream and yell about how these people are sick and how dare you type of thing, then we've gone wrong. We've gone way out of the norm here. The idea is, and what we need to go back to, let me continue with, this has created a foundation, because that's my point. This whole idea of addicts as sick has now created a foundation on which the left is now going to go ahead and build in order to fundamentally change and transform our society. It's never going to work. And so they're going to end up wasting their time and everyone else's time and a whole bunch of money in the process. They're also going to end up making other people miserable. Some people for the rest of their lives, and others just for short periods of time, like they always do. The left, that's what the left is famous for. All they're ultimately able to do is piss people off. They're just assholes with a capital A. And so that's the way this is going to end up as well. So instead of waiting around for this cycle cycle of this pathos, cycle of sadness to complete itself, we need to, as true conservatives, intervene. Let's do an intervention on this and say, throw the flag and say, this is crap. We're not going to do this anymore. By the way, one of the things of the left, the features of the left, is that they like to think and pretend, in some cases, that what they're doing, every time they come up with an idea, that it's brand new. Nobody's ever thought of it before, nobody's ever tried it before, and it's BS. If we want to get a glimpse of what it is that we're in for down the line, look at Switzerland. There's, I don't remember which city, but there's a city in Switzerland that was dealing with addicts, primarily heroin addicts, and trying left-wing techniques to deal with them. And they're using the addiction is a sickness model, and using it in the way that a deterministic, with a deterministic bent, so that the addict is not responsible for his or her behavior, which gives the addict no reason to recover, by the way. If you're not responsible for your behavior as long as you're an addict, then why do I want to get clean? Once I get clean, I have to accept responsibility for my behavior. And if part of the reason that I'm getting high all the time is because I can be irresponsible, I can blame all my problems on somebody else, why do I want to get clean? But anyway, so the city in Switzerland decided and let everybody in the city know, if you're an addict, there's a park, a certain park. And basically what they did is they turned it over to the addicts. You go and hang out in this park, we'll leave you alone. You shoot up, you do whatever you got to do in the park, and we won't arrest you. You won't be subjected to civil or criminal penalties. So what happened? They got sued. Why? Because people were dying. Addicts would go to the park, they'd shoot up, they'd overdose, and they'd die. And so the Swiss equivalent of the ACLU sued them, or their relatives sued the state and said, this is crap, it's irresponsible, you can't do this. So then the state took to being a drug supplier. Their solution to that was, addicts, come to the state, we'll have state-run clinics, you want your drugs, you come to us, and we'll get you high. And this way they can monitor the dose, make sure that the addict doesn't overdose and die, and make sure they get clean needles, and make sure the needles are disposed of in a hygienic fashion. And so then they interviewed a couple of these addicts, and they were unhappy. Gee, go figure. They were unhappy because there was no excitement surrounding their rituals anymore of getting high. So it used to be that you had to do everything sneaking around, go find your drug guy, and if he's in jail, then you got to find another drug guy, and you got to do it in an alley, and you got to be very careful so you don't get busted, or he doesn't get busted, or you don't get injured, shot, or killed. And then, of course, there's always the idea that you might end up, again, overdosing. So it's that is a thrill or an excitement, or that you're going to get bad stuff laced with something that kills you. Fentanyl, for instance. And they missed the excitement, is what they said. So it's going to come full circle. We were doing the right thing and are doing the right thing by treating addicts first and foremost as criminals. It doesn't matter why you commit crime, whether that crime is shooting up heroin or the crime is burglary. It doesn't matter why you did it from a right and wrong standpoint, from a morals standpoint. It does matter from the standpoint of justice. Justice being, what is it that you deserve? Okay, does the person that steals to get a loaf of bread to feed his family deserve the same punishment as the person that steals the loaf of bread to sell it to buy drugs? And they obviously don't. But that's a justice issue after you've been found guilty of burglary or robbery. Then we decide what it is that you deserve. But both of them, whether in terms of right and wrong and whether or not they're acting morally, are immoral. They're guilty of, let's call it burglary. They break into the store, steal the loaf of bread. They're both guilty of burglary. Now, again, the only difference between them is punishment time. One maybe deserves to be put on probation, and the other one maybe deserves to get some jail time or prison time. But that's a justice issue. The morals, but anyways, it all comes full circle. So what's going to happen with Switzerland eventually is they're going to go right back to making it illegal, and we're going to go right back to what we had before. And that the best way to have a peaceable and civilized country and society is to make sure that criminals are prosecuted and that the ones that deserve it serve long prison sentences. So, and we need to get back to that here in this country. We don't have to go as far as the Swiss did to realize that going this direction of we're not going to treat addicts as criminals, but as sick people, I guess, is not going to work. It's not going to make for a better society. It's going to make for a worse society. Treat them, and by the way, when you treat an addict as a criminal and put them in prison, what is it that they're not able to do, or at least not able to do as frequently, and that is heroin. It's going to be a lot easier for them to stay clean in prison than it is going to be for them to stay clean on the outside, at least for the first year or two. Because that's the toughest part of being sober, clean and sober, is the first 2 years. Once you get past that, it gets easier. But first 2 years, it's a rough go. And so if the addict is in prison, then they're forced to stay away from, or at least, I'm going to say forced to stay away from heroin. And so they're forced to be clean and sober for a period of time. But anyways, the point is, as long as we're going to use this model that the left has forced on us about the addict as simply a medical patient, and that we should run around and slapping hospital bracelets on all of them and putting them in gowns and then let them lie around in the street in their own filth, we're not going to get anywhere. Our society, our civilization is going to get worse and worse and worse. We need to go back to the model we used before, the addict as criminal. Okay, and it doesn't matter why he does what he does, whether he did it because he's an addict, he's sick, or he's not sick. It doesn't matter. You're breaking the law, and you're going to be held accountable. You're going to be arrested, prosecuted, and if when convicted, then you're going to be facing jail time. That's what we need to go back to in this country. And the left, again, always wants to do gratuitous change. Hey, why does it have to be this way? And the answer is because that's the way it is. That's the answer, period. And remember, this is, again, a change that we didn't need to make. Conservatives are guilty of going along with this change because we're the ones that are supposed to be conserving what? The status quo, and changing only when there's a clear case for change. But the left puts us on the defensive by demanding that we answer and that we prove a negative, prove why something shouldn't happen, prove why things shouldn't change. And when we succumb to that, we end up with gratuitous changes. Change for the sake of change. Change because it makes somebody excited. It gives somebody a reason to get up in the morning. There are people that are actually addicted to excitement. Some people express that by being an addict, and others do it by becoming politicians. But we don't give in to the addiction, the excitement addiction. We demand that the left prove it. Why should it be this way? Why should it be any other way? Why should it be different? Does it have to be this way? Who cares? Well, I do. Why? Okay, that's the best way actually to shut all that down. And then they're stuck. The burden of proof is always on those that want change. You have to remember that. The burden of proof is on those that want change. Whether it is maybe a change in the menu at your house, maybe every Tuesday is taco night, and somebody says, "Oh, I want to do something different." Why? Make them come up with a good answer to that question, because the whole family likes tacos. One person says no, you're not going to change everything just so that other person can get some sense of excitement, right? So, actually a rather poor example, but if I come up with a better one, I'll let you know. But anyways, the bottom line here is we don't change for the sake of change. We change because there's a damn good reason for it. There was no damn good reason to change the model of treating the addict as a criminal, fundamentally as a criminal. We don't anymore. Now we treat them as some kind of a hospital outpatient or something, and we're suffering because of it. Our society is suffering. Our civilization is suffering. And so what you do when you've lost your way is you go back. You go back to the place where you know where you are, right? You try to find your way back to wherever it is that you started from. If you're doing an experiment and it doesn't work, you go back to the drawing board and come up with a new experiment. This experiment with treating the addicts as patients, hospital patients, that kind of thing, doesn't work. So we need to go back to addicts as criminals, and then if the left wants to come up with some kind of a new experiment, then we can demand that they prove to us that that change is worth making and start doing things right. Thank you. That brings me to the end of another episode of The Drill. Be honest, be smart, be beautiful. I'm Ron, and that's The Drill.